Hello everyone. Last lecture we have seen our TYBAC geology syllabus of paper 2 igneous petrology, along with one lecture on internal structure of earth. Internal structure of earth has been completed, like crust, mantle and core. Today we are learn about classification of igneous rocks. First one, igneous petrology. Igneous petrology has been studied into three ways: petrography, petrology and petrogenesis. Petrology means the branch, the description of systematic classification of rock. Petrography means the description of systematic classification of rocks aided by the microscopic examination of the thin section. Microscopic examination of thin section. And petrology means the study of origin of igneous rocks, occurrence of igneous rocks, structures and textural characteristics of igneous rocks, called as petrology. And petrogenesis means the branch of petrology dealing with the study of origin and its formation of rocks, involving combination of mineralogical, chemical and field data, is called as petrogenesis. There are three type of study has been carried out in the igneous petrology: petrographical analysis, petrological analysis and petrogenesis. Petrography means description and systematic classification of igneous rocks based on mineralogy and chemistry. Then petrography, the study of origin, occurrence and history of the rocks, is called as petrology. And petrogenesis means the how to origin of igneous rocks, textures of igneous rocks and mineral and chemical characteristics of igneous rocks, called as petrogenesis. Today we are going to study classification of igneous rocks. We already learned about the crust and mantle and core. Crust and mantle. The crust thickness is 0 to 4 km is already studied. Then crust divided into two ways: continental crust and oceanic crust. The thickness of continental crust 0 to 40 km, average 35 km, and oceanic crust is thickness 10 km. Then also mantle is made up of peridotite, is already studied in the last lecture. Also the upper mantle is made up of peridotitic igneous rocks. Upper mantle is thickness from 42 to 520 km, and then lower mantle 520 to 2900 km. Then start core, and core is made up of nickel and iron and cobalt. There again core divided into two layers: outer core and inner core. The thickness for outer core is 2900 to 5120 km, and inner core is 5120 km to 6371 km. These are the internal structure of earth, is already studied in the last lecture. Then today we are learn about the nomenclature and classification of igneous rocks. How to know nomenclature of igneous rocks: why called as basic, why called as granite, why called as dolerite, why called as gabbro, why called as kimberlite, why called as lamprophile, based on particular physics and chemistry of the earth, physical and chemical nature of the particular rock, then called as nomenclature of the particular rock. The chemical composition of magma and the physical and chemical condition present during the crystallization of magma. Any igneous rocks are formed due to the cooling of magma. First comes a lava, then lava has been magma. There are two types of igneous rocks: magmatic lava, magma and lava. The rocks are formed due to the lava and magma, cooling at lava and cooling of magma. The magma means those rocks are cool below the subsurface, called as plutonic igneous rocks. That is called as magma type of igneous rocks. And those magma comes above the surface. Those magma comes above the surface in the form of lava. Then these rocks are formed is called as volcanic igneous rocks. Volcano, through these magma, the magma conduit from the volcano and then volcanic eruption, and those magma cool comes on the surface, called as lava, and those igneous rocks are formed due to the cooling of lava, called as volcanic rock, and those magma cool below the surface, called as plutonic igneous rocks or called as magma. Means actual formation of igneous rocks based on cooling and crystallization of magma. The mineral composition and texture are to be used to describe the name and classification of igneous rocks. Any igneous rocks has been their nomenclature and their classification based on the textures and its chemistry, textures and its physics and chemistry of the rock. Overall chemistry, whole rock chemistry, and the chemical constituent minerals offers clues the igneous rock's origin. clue the origin of igneous rocks. Then problem in rock classification in the selection of basic classification. Proposed classification used to textural classification, mineralogical classification, chemical classification, geographical location, and rock association. The systematic of nomenclature and classification may reflect genetic classification, textural classification, and chemical classification and mineralogical classification. Genetic classification is morphology, whether it is plutonic, whether it is volcanic, whether it is hyperbasal. Plutonic means magma cool below the subsurface, called as plutonic. When magma comes above the surface in the form of lava, called as volcanic, and between this intermediate zone, called as hyperbasal igneous rock. This is the morphological, means this is the genetic classification of igneous rocks: plutonic, volcanic, and hyperbasal. Plutonic means the magma cool below the subsurface, called as plutonic. When magma comes above the surface, called as volcanic, and between those plutonic and volcanic, called as hyperbasal, also called as intermediate type of igneous rocks. This is the genetic classification of igneous rocks: plutonic, volcanic, and hyperbasal. The best example of plutonic igneous rock, that is the granite. The granitic magma are cool below the subsurface, called as plutonic rock. And volcanic means those magma comes above the surface in the form of lava, called as volcanic igneous rocks. The best example of volcanic igneous rocks is basalt. And another type of classification is textural classification of igneous rocks based on textures, whether it is fine grain, coarse grain, medium grain. The grain size of the mineral, the grain size of crystal mineral presence in the rock. The rock is made up of different types of mineral. Suppose, for example, granite. The granite is made up of augite plus hypersthene plus quartz. Different types of mineral. The aggregate of minerals is called as rock. The aggregate of mineral called as rock. And the rock, grain size of the rock, based on the grain size of the rock, is called as textural classification of igneous rocks. The igneous rocks has been classified into the texture, that is three types: fine grain igneous rocks, medium grain igneous rocks, and coarse grain igneous rocks. Those crystal size is greater than 2 mm called as coarse grain, and less than 0.1 mm size of the crystal called as fine grain. The best example of fine grain igneous rock is basalt. In our Deccan tribe, in our Ratnagiri region, in our Marathwada, in our Maharashtra, most of the Maharashtra covered by the basalt. 82% part of the Maharashtra is covered by the Deccan basalt. These all the Deccan basaltic rock belongs to the fine grain type of igneous rocks. Coarse grain igneous rocks. The example of coarse grain igneous rock is best example of coarse grain igneous rocks is granite. The size of crystal is greater than basalt, called as coarse grain, and in between, intermediate between 2 mm to 0.1 mm, called as medium grain sized igneous rocks. Means based on the crystal size, based on the grain size of the mineral, called as textural classification of igneous rocks. Another is mineralogical classification. Mineralogical classification means felsic rock and mafic rock. Felsic means those rocks containing higher amount of feldspar and alkali, feldspar and silica feldspar, called as felsic mineral. And mafic mineral means pyroxene, olivine, and amphibole. Dark color mineral called as mafic mineral. Light color mineral is called as felsic mineral. Felsic and mafic mineral is called as mineralogical classification of igneous rocks. Felsic mineral means quartz and feldspar. Those rocks containing quartz and feldspar called as felsic rock. And those rocks are mostly made up of, mostly, not only one, mostly made up of olivine, pyroxene, amphibole, and mica. This is called as mafic igneous rocks. Mafic means dark color. Which type of minerals are belongs to the dark color? Olivine, pyroxene, amphibole, and mica. These are the mafic mineral. Quartz, feldspar, and feldspathites are the light color. Okay. Then chemico-mineralogical classification. Chemical classification. Chemical classification based on the silica percentage. The chemical classification of igneous rocks has been classified into 4 types: acidic, basic, intermediate, ultra basic. Acidic, basic, intermediate, basic, and ultra basic. Acidic means those rocks containing more than 66% of silica presence in the rock, called as acidic igneous rocks. The best example of acidic igneous rocks is granite. The best example of acidic igneous rocks is granite. The granite containing more than 66% silica, called as acidic igneous rocks. Then intermediate, gabbro and dolerite, if the silica percentage is between 54 to 66% called as intermediate type of igneous rocks, and those igneous rocks containing 44 to 54% of silica called as basic igneous rocks. The best example of basic igneous rocks is basalt. Basalt is best example of basic igneous rocks. And ultra basic means very little amount of silica present in igneous rocks called as ultra basic igneous rocks. Example: peridotite, dunite and pyroxenite. Dunite is mostly made up of olivine. In dunite, more than 90% of dunite is made up of olivine mineral. Olivine is a mafic mineral, dark colored mineral or heavy mineral. Therefore, it is called as monomineralic rock. Monomineralic rock means the only one mineral presence in the more than 90% in a particular one rock. In one rock, more than 90% of one mineral present in one rock called as monomineralic rock. The example of monomineralic rock is dunite and pyroxenite. Dunite is made up of only olivine. More than 99% of olivine presence in the dunite. Hence, it is called as monomineralic rock as well as ultra basic igneous rocks. Ultra basic, why it is called as ultra basic? Because higher concentration of basic mineral present in a rock, olivine. Another example is pyroxenite. Pyroxenite is mostly made up of pyroxene mineral. In pyroxene, near about more than 95% of pyroxene mineral present in that pyroxenite rock. Hence, it is called as monomineralic rock. Monomineralic means only one mineral present in a greater quantity, called as monomineralic igneous rocks. These are the chemico-mineralogical classification of igneous rocks. Means genetic classification, textural classification, mineralogical classification, chemico-mineralogical classification. These are the different classification are igneous rocks. So one by one in detail. We learn about we see one by one in detail classification of igneous rocks. Number one, genetic classification of igneous rocks. This is the basic system which classify rocks based on the where it's formed. Basic system which classify the rocks where it is formed. Plutonic, volcanic, hypobasal. Plutonic at depth, below the subsurface. Below the surface, those igneous rocks are formed below the subsurface, called as plutonic igneous rocks. Intermediate at intermediate depth, not great depth, not above the surface. Intermediate depth, called as intermediate igneous rocks. It is also called as hypobasal igneous rocks. The best example of plutonic igneous rock is, I already told, that is the granite. In hypobasal igneous rock is peridotite. Then volcanic igneous rocks on the earth's surface. Those rocks, those magma comes above the surface in the form of volcanism, like Satpura mountain basalt, Sahyadri mountain basalt. These are the product of volcanic eruption. These are the basalt. These are the rocks are product of volcanic eruption, called as volcanic igneous rocks. The best example of volcanic igneous rocks, that is the basalt. Sometimes trachyte. These are the volcanic igneous rocks. Rhyolite is plutonic igneous rocks. In Colombia and America, that is the Andes mountain, there is andesite. Andesite is one of the volcanic type of igneous rocks. This system is not very practical, but it is serves as first approximation. It tells nothing about the mineralogy, chemistry rocks, and cannot be distinguished basalt from rhyolite. Means it is only physical classification of igneous rocks, very rough classification of igneous rocks. It is not identify the any mineralogy, any chemistry, and any physical nature of the rock. Only naked eyes, whether it is where in the form of volcano, called as volcanic igneous rocks. Those rocks are cool below the subsurface, called as plutonic, and between them called as hypobasal igneous rocks. Then textural classification in detail relies on the grain size of the individual minerals present in the rock. Then what is the definition of rock? Rock is aggregate of mineral. And what is the definition of mineral? The mineral is naturally occurring inorganic substance with definite chemical composition and atomic structure, called as minerals. And rock is aggregate of minerals. There are different types of mineral presence in one rock. Suppose example basalt. In our Ratnagiri region, in our Sahyadri region, Sahyadri mountains, and near about 82% part of the Maharashtra covered by the basalt, Deccan tract. And in this basalt, there are 2 to 3 different mineral present. The maximum proportion of basalt made up of pyroxene, augite mineral, pyroxene variety, augite. Then little amount of quartz and some plagioclase feldspar are present in a rock, means more than 3 4 minerals present in one rock. The textural classification of igneous rocks based on the grain size of the mineral, grain size of the individual minerals. Suppose you see the granite. In granite there are 3 different minerals. It's typical granite. There are different type of granite, different type of mineral present, but typical granite, biotite granite. Suppose the biotite granite made up of 3 major minerals: quartz, biotite, and feldspar. Orthoclase feldspar showing pink color, and quartz showing white color, and biotite showing black color. These are the 3 different minerals. All the minerals are greater than 5 mm, more than 2 mm, greater than 5 mm size of the 5 millimeter size of the grain size, called as coarse grain. The granite is best example of coarse grain. Means based on textural classification, the textural classification are assigned based on the size of grains of individual minerals present in the rock. Coarse grain, medium grain, fine grain. Coarse grain means those minerals are greater than 5 millimeter size, called as coarse grain. The best example of coarse grain igneous rock, that is the granite. And fine grains means less than 1 millimeter size of the individual grains present in the mineral, called as fine grain. And best example of fine grain igneous rock is basalt. And between the fine grain and coarse grain, that is the medium grain, between 1 millimeter to 5 millimeter size of individual mineral grains, called as medium grain igneous rocks. Also, fine grain igneous rocks has been called as aphanetic igneous rocks. Aphanetic is Greek word. Aphanetic type of igneous rocks means fine grain. Phaneretic means medium grain, and coarse grain. These are the classification of igneous rocks based on texture. Another one, chemical classification of igneous rocks require complete analysis of the rock. The chemical classification of igneous rocks only based on the complete rock analysis of the geochemical analysis of particular rock, whole rock geochemical analysis. How analyze the geochemical analysis of rock? The rock has been some powder, create some powder and create a pellet, and that pellets are taken and run on the particular instrument like atomic absorption spectra, X-ray diffraction, X-ray fluorescence, inductively coupled plasma mass spectra. These instruments are analyzed the whole rock geochemical analysis. How much percentage of particular element? Here our total 108 element, naturally occurring element. The total number of naturally occurring element is 108 element analysis, the whole rock geochemical analysis, and then output the chemical classification of igneous rock: silica, magnesium, aluminium, calcium, chloride, sulfate, phosphate, nitrate, zinc, molybdenum, iron, copper, manganese, different minerals, lanthanide series mineral, lutetium, radioactive elements like uranium, thorium, trace elements, molybdenum, minor elements, phosphorus, titanium. These are the different elements. There are different classification of elements: major element, minor element, trace element, rare earth element, radioactive element. These are a different classification of igneous element. These interpretation based on after the analysis of particular rock sample, whole rock geochemical analysis, and that we identify the classification of igneous rocks based on the chemistry. Chemical system has been proposed for the volcanic rocks. Comparable scheme plutonic rock is not available. The volcanic rock is very easy to identify, but in plutonic rock is not available because of most of the plutonic rock are present below the subsurface, and most of the volcanic rock are presence of the above the surface exposure. So it is possible to go to the field, collect the sample, and analyze the sample. But in case of plutonic rock, it is very tough task because of it is required to the drill, and maximum drill as on till date only 12 kilometer. In India, the maximum deep mining is Kolar goldfield, that is deep away from surface up to the 10 kilometer only. Means total thickness of our earth is 6,371 kilometer, and out of that only 12 kilometer you should we were as on too late go up to the 12 kilometer only. This leaves us with the system based on mineralogy, chemical classification, like acidic, basic and ultra basic. Acidic means the silica percentage is more than 66%, basic means less than 44%, 44 to 55%, and between 55 to 66% called as intermediate type of igneous rocks, and less than 44% of silica presence in a rock called as ultra basic igneous rocks. These are the chemical classification of igneous rocks: acidic, basic, intermediate and ultra basic. Acidic means more than 66% of silica. The best example of acidic igneous rocks is granite. And intermediate between 55 to 66% of silica presence in a rock called as intermediate type of igneous rocks. The example, dolerite and gabbro. And basic igneous rocks means the silica percentage less than 44%. Silica percentage in a rock between 44 to 55% called as basic igneous rocks. The example of basic igneous rocks is andesite and basalt. And another is ultra basic igneous rocks. Those igneous rocks containing lesser than 44% of silica presence in a rock called as ultra basic igneous rocks. Example, olivine. Example, dunite, pyroxenite, amphibolite, pyroxenite, dunite, and these are the example of ultra basic igneous rocks. Another is mineralogical classification of igneous rocks. The one gaining application is the result of several years work by the International Union of Geological Sciences (IGS), Libas and Trickinson, especially the scientists Libas and Trickinson. Lot of work on the IUGS classification of igneous rocks, subcommission on the classification of igneous rocks, or Trickinson's classification of igneous rocks. Gradation in silica content. I already talk about the chemical classification of igneous rocks: acidic, intermediate, basic and ultra basic. Acidic means greater than 66% weight percentage of silicon dioxide, SiO2. Those rocks containing higher amount of silica, SiO2, greater than 66% called as acidic igneous rocks. Example, granite, granodiorite. In granite, the silica percentage greater than 72%, and granodiorite between 68 to 72%. Granodiorite is one of the example of acidic igneous rocks. Intermediate, andesite is one of the example of intermediate igneous rocks. Silica percentage 57%. Basic igneous rocks 44 to 52%. Example, basalt. The range of basalt in silica is from 40 to 50%, 50%. Then ultra basic. The best example of ultra basic igneous rocks is dunite and pyroxenite and peridotite. Then another classification of igneous rocks based on color gradation. Dark colored mineral presence in a rock called as mafic rock, and light colored mineral present in a rock called as felsic rock. Felsic rocks means those rocks are containing higher amount of quartz and feldspar mineral. Because of quartz and feldspar is light colored minerals, and means those igneous rocks are made up of quartz and feldspar called as felsic type of igneous rocks. Felsic mineral means light colored mineral, and dark colored mineral means mafic mineral. Dark color, which minerals are belongs to the dark color mineral? Olivine, pyroxene, amphibole, mica. These minerals are dark color mineral, and those rocks containing amphibole, pyroxene, mica and olivine called as mafic type of igneous rocks. These are color gradation. The chemical composition of rock is determined by analyzing the powder of rock. You collect the rock sample from field, and then this rock crushed in some agar and to create a powder, and routine geochemical analysis of geochemical material can be carried out using either a combination of following two techniques: X-ray fluorescence and atomic absorption spectra. X-ray fluorescence, XRF, to determine the both major and trace element. That means what are the major elements? Major elements means those rocks are those minerals are present in a rock is major amount, greater than 1%. Suppose the rock weight is 1 kg, out of then 1 gram, suppose 10 gram, more than 10 gram, one particular element present in a rock called as major element. Those elements are present in a rock greater than 1% of by quantity, 1%. Suppose 100 gram, or you take sample 100 gram sample of rock, that 1 gram those minerals are present greater than 1 gram or 1% by weight called as major element. And trace element, minor element means those elements are present between 0.1 to 1% called as minor element. And trace element means less than 0.1% present in a rock called as trace element. How many major elements? Like SiO2, silica, MgO, magnesium oxide, Na2O, sodium oxide, K2O, FeO, Fe2O3, CaO, Na2O, K2O, P2O5. These are the major element, and minor element is TiO2, MnO, and TiO2, MnO. These are the magnesium oxide and titanium oxide are the minor element. And trace element like copper, zinc, manganese, iron, then mercury, copper, arsenic, then Hg, mercury. These are the trace element analyzed by the X-ray fluorescence and atomic absorption spectra, AAS, atomic absorption spectroscopy, to determine the major and trace element. Both instruments are used for the analysis of major, trace and minor element. The composition of igneous rock is dependent on composition of the source material. The composition of igneous rock is dependent on composition of source material, the magma, actual composition of magma, then this same composition between the magma and after production of igneous rocks, depth of melting, then tectonic environment, and when crystallization occurs. Time of example rippling versus subduction, and secondary alteration due to the weathering and erosion. Sometimes weathering and erosion, rock has been altered and some of the heavy metal and trace element removed from the original rock. Rock classification based on silica saturation. Another classification is rock classification based on silica, saturation of silica, oversaturated, saturated, unsaturated. Oversaturated means contains primary silica mineral, called as oversaturated type of igneous rocks. And saturated means neither quartz nor unsaturated mineral like olivine and pyroxene amphibole, called as saturated. Unsaturated contains unsaturated minerals like olivine, pyroxene and amphibole. These are the classification of igneous rocks. Genetic classification, chemical classification, chemico-mineralogical classification, silica percentage classification, and based on morphological classification. Okay, any doubt? If you have any doubt, please write an email, on WhatsApp group regarding this topic: classification of igneous rock, genetic classification, chemical classification, mineralogical classification, morphological classification, and combination of chemico-mineralogical classification by silica saturation classification. You should write any doubt on WhatsApp group. I will reply you too. Also, I will conduct MCQ based test and essay type questions on this topic later on our Google platform.